Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Paige Smith and I'm a student majoring in communication and media at Clarkson University. Today we are hosting a conversation with Stephen Todd, the Assistant Superintendent of the St. Lawrence Lewis BOCES School, about education grants. Joining him today is Ann Carville, an education blogger, and Donna Seymour from the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women. Welcome. Donna, will you get us started?
Thank you. Steve, thank you for coming back. It's nice to have you back in the studio. We had a good conversation last fall about some of the grants that BOCES had gotten, but what we didn't get to were the ones that you had on tap. And I know that some of those have come through, so we want to chat with you about those and find out what's going on. Just as a little recap for folks, these BOCES grants are a great way for the smaller school districts in rural northern New York to leverage their power to get some of these grants that they couldn't qualify or find someone to write for them as an individual. So working through BOCES in that consortium is a great way to leverage the power of small schools and give them some of the same capacity that the larger schools have, don't they?
I think so, and I want to thank you, Donna and for having me back, and WCKN. It is fun to be able to come back and give happy news after you've had an initial conversation. I think you characterized it exactly right. When we spoke in October, we talked quite a bit about the challenges that our small, largely poor rural schools face in going after competitive grants. That in this time of really tight, there's less money than there has been coming from the state. Tight financial times. The state wants to be able to fund all kinds of wonderful programs, but they realize we don't have enough to go around for everyone, so we'll have a competitive grant process, and those who are successful in that process will be able to fund programs, worthy programs, that it would be nice for everyone to have. Now, historically, we found, as we talked about last time, that our schools have been at a competitive disadvantage in that regard, because when you've got a full-time grant writer on staff, it's easier to win those grants. Big districts, sometimes wealthier districts have had that resource. We have not always had that resource. And what we talked about in October was the fact that we were no longer going to sit on the sidelines and no longer going to say, well, it would be nice if we could go after those. We were going to work together with our partners, our 18 districts here in St. Lawrence Lewis BOCES, with our partners that are BOCES to the south, Jefferson, Lewis, Hamilton, Herkimer, Oneida BOCES. And together, we hired a grant writer for 36 school districts. And her name is Deborah O'Connor. And Deborah has worked with our staff, who have worked mightily alongside her in pursuit of some grants. And I do have some major success stories to report since then.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
I think that may be my job then. I get the good question. Steve, I've heard that BOCES has pursued and won 3 major grants since last you were here. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if you could identify them and tell us the good news all about them. Absolutely.
Well, this fall we applied for the second round of a grant called Strengthening Teacher Leader Effectiveness. There have been 3 rounds of it so far, and in the first round we did not pursue it as a regional consortium grant. 2 of our individual districts, Ogdensburg and Brazier Falls, did, and they were successful. But in the second round, we marshaled 14 districts together who were eligible at that time to go after these monies, which were earmarked for districts that could come up with an innovative type of program that would help them to build a capacity to implement Common Core and the other parts of the region's reform agenda, which I think we all know have been a huge challenge for districts because there's so much work to do, so much to learn, so much professional development that needs to be done, and only so many hands on deck to be able to do it. So this grant was designed to say, if you had a pot of money, how could you enhance your capacity to get that work done in a really creative way? So what we proposed on behalf of our 14 districts was the development of a very large cohort of teacher leaders. basically saying it's not enough for administrators and professional developers who do this for a living to be out there doing this. We need many hands on deck, and nobody knows this business better than the teachers in the classroom. And everybody knows that a teacher who knows what it's like can better lead side by side with another teacher who's right in the trenches, right with them in the school, because they know what it's like. So that's what this is about. And in that second round, those 14 districts were successful in securing just shy of $1.5 million over the course of 18 months. They'll use that to help fund 2 different types of teacher leaders. One is a team of regional teacher leaders who will be away from their classrooms as teachers on special assignment, and they will be full-time working with their colleagues as specialists in a particular portion of the new curriculum. So there'll be a kindergarten through 2nd grade English language arts specialist, a 3 through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12 on the English language arts side, and the same thing on the math side, and then a 9th regional teacher leader who will specialize in literacy across the curriculum to help all teachers outside of ELA and math to integrate the new Common Core into their curriculum. These folks will each respectively work to lead district teacher leaders. Each of the 14 districts in the second round, and actually let me piggyback on that and say there was a third round of that grant. The other 4 districts in our region that were ineligible in round 2, we applied on their behalf. They were successful in receiving another $440,000. So together in rounds 2 and 3, we have just shy of $2 million to work with in the next 18 months to build this cohort of 9 regional teacher leaders and over 150 district teacher leaders. So inside each of the 18 districts, there will be a corresponding teacher leader in each of those sub-areas of ELA and math and reading across the content areas with their regional leader leading them. And that capacity is going to be here for a very long time. Even after the grant monies are gone, we will have these highly trained, highly motivated, highly respected teacher leaders right at home in their own districts leading each other.
Now, Steve, this is really the implementation piece that was kind of missing when we started the Common Core back in September, right? This is the piece that if we could have had this piece in place, it would have made it so much smoother than it has been, throughout this year. So
that's the truth. If we could turn back the clock, that would have been a nice first step.
So what that tells us is that going forward, that's really going to make the Common Core take off like a rocket, isn't it? Once you've got this cadre of people with this specialized training who are in district and ready to go to work.
Absolutely. We're very, very hopeful. And I want to really give a great deal of credit to Jennifer French, who is our Senior Supervisor for School Improvement, who worked mightily hard on this. This was her key project, and she worked side by side with Deborah O'Connor, our shared grant writer, on this, and the two of them deserve a tremendous amount of credit for their effort, really kind of pulling together the efforts of these 18 districts. So those are 2 huge successes. Another, shall I talk about our third success, the Rural Utilities Service grant?
Sure.
That's another one that, again, I have to give Jennifer French credit on. She was our leader on that one. It's through the United States Department of Agriculture. Rural Utilities Service is a program designed to provide poor, underserved areas with the kind of access to high-end technologies that will allow video conferencing and distance learning to be a reality. Not only because they've been underserved, but because they can benefit from them. We can benefit them from those sorts of technologies perhaps better than folks who are living in more concentrated population centers. So we were successful in securing $500,000, which is a match. So if, as they did, our 18 districts committed to spend $500,000 on of monies on infrastructure and equipment to upgrade the distance learning network. Another $500,000 came as a match from the federal government in this competitive grant. So we'll have $1 million upgrade to the distance learning network of this area, and we think that's going to be a huge game changer for our kids as we're able to now provide them with more opportunities for distance learning.
It's wonderful.
Steve, does the work that you're going to be able to do in the districts, does that match up with some of the technology infrastructure that has been coming into the area through some of these federal grants, which is to connect rural areas and to, it's sort of like the old rural electrification, only now it's the internet and those kind of things. So you're actually building the capacity within the districts to take advantage of the in-between community work that's being done.
Absolutely.
That's
no, I think
great.
that's fair. I think there's a natural synergy between, if you've got a network of people working to try and support one another across a vast geographic area, and you've got a technology that allows them perhaps to meet face-to-face from their own schools without having to physically come to the same room, that video conferencing, not only for distance learning for kids, it could be really powerful in helping teachers to network and work together and make
Absolutely.
And it sounds like it would go right back to what we were talking about with your first 2 grants and talking about developing these master teachers with these, they can share this now much more easily than physically having to drive. How would this impact, and this is something that I know, Ann, you're interested in, how would this impact, for example, being able to have, like say, a Latin teacher serve several districts at the same time through distance learning, who they can no longer afford to hire a Latin teacher, but could we have that kind of a situation in place?
Absolutely, and in any imaginable type of subject. That's the beautiful part. If you look at the course catalogs available to our kids in our 18 districts, we don't have very many of those types of enriching programs anymore, partly because of the money, but partly because of our numbers. Very hard for many of our districts to run sections of a course when they might only have 2 or 3 possible participants. But if you could, say, have 2 or 3 in Potsdam, 2 or 3 in Ogdensburg, 2 or 3 in Gouverneur, it doesn't take very long before you've got a full class of kids. And so you could see it in Latin, you could see it in a good number of AP-type offerings, variety of really neat enrichment courses. So I do think this the new technology, because most of our video conferencing technology around here was about 10 years old, which doesn't sound very old, but in the world of technology, it becomes obsolete fairly quickly. And this new round of infrastructure upgrades is going to put our kids back in the driver's seat with regard to those opportunities.
Good. And just a quick question. Do you see this distance learning possibly costing people their jobs? Because I know that was a consideration in the past.
Yeah, I know that's been a concern by many, but I don't envision that happening. I see it actually, quite honestly, perhaps saving jobs.
Good.
Because if you imagine what's been happening in many of our districts over the last 5 years, they've been atrophying, and you've seen them shedding teachers. It's been almost like they're hemorrhaging teachers.
Yes.
It's been horrendous. And this would enable, I think, folks who might have a Latin teacher on staff and might have had to let that program go and that teacher go, they might be able to keep that person on board now because they can support the program. And you could extend that out across all of the various other programs that might be able to become viable because of the numbers that distance learning could provide. So personally, I don't see this, I see it as more of an opportunity to save teachers.
Excellent. I agree with you.
Well,
Donna?
and not only that, but for example, I know there was a situation back at the beginning of the school year down in General Brown. They needed a half-time physics teacher and couldn't find anybody willing to teach a half-time because those people had better offers in industry. So this has to make it easier for some people to stay in teaching that would not be able to do it because you can't live on a half-time job.
That's right.
So that's good. So Steve, what are you pursuing right now? What is out there in the pipeline that you've applied for that you're hoping to get?
Well, we've got another grant that we're very excited about right now. It's through the Title IIB program, which is targeted towards math science partnerships. And in the request for proposals, it basically asked individual districts or groups of districts to find a college partner. And in
something we're pretty good at here
good
in the North Country.
And we're very proud of our partnerships with all 4 of our colleges here in St. Lawrence County. And in this case, we've partnered with all of the colleges at various points. In this case, we're partnering with SUNY Potsdam because we've had a partnership with them for about the last 2 years, working with our elementary math teachers. Because what we've seen, and I think we've seen around the state, is that if there's one area that has the highest need of professional development and support among our teaching staff, it's elementary level mathematics. Because the Common Core is asking a good deal more of teachers and kids at an earlier age. And so we've provided a good deal of professional development in partnership with SUNY Potsdam. And so when this grant came along, we thought, do we go the science route or do we go the math route? Who do we partner with? And among our various options, we thought it just made sense to continue that partnership that we've had with SUNY Potsdam. And we have proposed a pretty robust program of elementary math professional development over the course of 2 years if we're successful in securing this grant. We think it will dovetail very nicely with our Strengthening Teacher Leader Effectiveness grant. We'll have this network of teacher leaders and trainers who will be embedded in the districts and around the region, and then we'll have this focus on early numeracy, which we think could really help our districts to fast forward their improvement in that area.
Does that also help to strengthen the teacher preparation programs, because the fact that, you know, these kinds of partnerships are being built between the school districts and the colleges, where a lot of young people are going to college to learn to be teachers. So I would think it would help to strengthen and make them a much better have a much better opportunity to learn what really is needed for, especially, as you say, with the Common Core being such a new, rigorous curriculum that people, I imagine if you were trained 10 years ago, you're kind of at sea in some of this material because it's looking at things so differently than how you were trained.
It's very different, and I do think this definitely will help to further cement the partnership between, in this case, the districts of the North Country and SUNY Potsdam in their teacher preparation program. I've got to give SUNY Potsdam a lot of credit. Peter Bauer and his team have worked very closely with us. I've had the privilege of serving with Peter and many of his colleagues on their team, which has been working to revamp their program to align it with the new EdTPA requirements, which, much like the new expectations for teachers and students in the K-12 world, the teacher preparation programs are going through a revolution right now in terms of change and expectations. Very rapid change. They're experiencing many of the same stresses that our K-12 districts have. And so we've partnered closely with them, and I think it's been mutually beneficial. And this partnership in the Math Science Partnership grant, I think could very well be, you know, the next step in what I think will be an ongoing series of mutually beneficial supports between us.
Excellent. Well, now we're on to another hot topic, which is pre-K.
Yes.
Most of us who are paying attention have read about the proposed expansion of it. We've read about de Blasio in New York City and what's going on with him and the governor. So it's of interest, of course, to many people with young children. Where is pre-K headed around here?
Well, I think what you'd find is, in most cases, most of our districts already have programs that would be the envy of other parts of the state with large participation. Not what you would call universal pre-K, where we say every student participates, but if you were to go from district to district, I think you'd find in most districts that most or all of the people who would like to participate are able to, and the kids of highest need in particular are given priority there. I know that's not the case in every part of the state, and perhaps why Mr. de Blasio is so passionate about this, that in New York City perhaps there's a greater need or perhaps more of an unmet need than in other areas. It's interesting. Recently there was, before the big public efforts on pre-K by Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo, there was a grant grant opportunity that was issued for pre-kindergarten programming, either to turn half-day programs into whole-day programs or to start programs where they don't exist. And it was a small amount of money, relatively speaking, compared to what they're talking about now in this more universal approach. And a few of our districts applied. We did not apply as a regional consortium because, again, this was not one that lent itself to a regional consortium grant. But none of the districts in our BOCES region or Jefferson Lewis BOCES that applied for that were successful. But the monies, it was $33 million that was given out. $27 million of it went to 13 city school districts, New York and the Big Five and other large cities. The remaining $5.3 million going to 14 other small districts around the state. Bear in mind there are 700 school districts, or just shy of 700. So again, that's an example of, you know, a worthy project, but a pretty small pot of money. I'm very glad for the people who received that funding, because it'll do a lot of good with those kids and for those kids. But it's an example of where it wasn't enough, perhaps, to provide a universal application.
Steve, one of the things I've read several times about pre-K is that it's more successful if you have a very highly qualified teacher.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, it doesn't give the benefits one might hope for.
Absolutely.
Is this something that you have seen or have been reading about as well?
It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And along with the Common Core standards in K-12, what many people don't realize is there are also pre-kindergarten standards there, and they're rigorous. And so certainly, I think, to be effective, a pre-kindergarten program really ought to be based upon those rigorous standards. It shouldn't be just babysitting.
It's not
It ought to
babysitting,
be getting the kids ready and giving them a step up and an opportunity to be ready for the rigorous expectations of kindergarten.
Coming ahead of them, yes.
And I have a kindergartner granddaughter, and I am amazed at the level of the work that she is being exposed to, particularly on the math side of things. And it's all it's all a result of the Common Core, and it's very heartening to see that that is a very visible upgrade in the standards. And so I've really been very interested to watch that and to see what's come home and the way that she thinks about math questions now. It's very multidimensional. It's not just numbers anymore, that's for sure. Steve, sometimes you have an opportunity to go after a grant that you decide not to go after.
Yes.
What makes you not take one of those opportunities? What's kind of the criteria for yes, we're gonna, or no, that just isn't a place that we're gonna head, at least not right now?
That's a great question, and those are sometimes the toughest decisions to make, because occasionally you'll see a grant that you think, oh my God, that's perfect for us. And you don't even have to think about it for a second. You know, that's exactly what we need. Other times you agonize and you say, well, it looks good, but it would take a massive amount of staff time during a window of time when I have to pull people away from other things, and you're sort of torn. More often than not, it's that you're kind of torn. It's often a tough decision. The big question we ask is, we're not just going to chase after a pot of money. Is this something we need to do? Is this something that is work that needs to be done already? And so that's criterion number one. Not just chasing a pot of money. Is it money that needs to be invested anyway, and this will help us to do it. Second big question is sustainability. You don't want to go after a pot of money to build an infrastructure that after a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, whenever it ends, leaves the district and the community holding the bag, where they either have to go and slash a program that they value and they love, which is painful, or find cash that they don't have to sustain something. So there needs to be a sustainability factor in there.
And that actually is something that we've seen over and over and over again, because of what started out as a great program somehow then turned into an unfunded mandate.
Correct.
And whether it's because you don't want to let a great program go, so you keep trying to figure out how to do it, or whether you just simply don't have a choice, you're forced to keep a program, but that federal or that state support is gone. So
that's right.
that I think is an area that we could spend a lot more time looking at, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we're very intentional about that. We think about it quite a bit. Other questions, likelihood of success. Like I said, if it's a grant, for instance, there was one that I'll use as an example that came up a few months ago, and it killed us not to go after it because on the surface it looked so promising. But it was a U.S. Department of Labor Employment Training Administration grant that, in partnership with Department of Labor, it was a federal grant. You could pursue big chunks of money. I mean, it was about $100 million, as I recall, that was available nationwide, but they were only going to give between 25 and 40 grants out across the entire United States. So you start doing the math and you say, all right, low probability right off the bat there, even though it's a big potential upside. But then other things we had to look at were the turnaround time. If we were to do this, in the fall we would have had to pull staff away from other important initiatives, going for something that we thought we had a low probability of success. Another thing that was a deal breaker for us on that particular one was there was a requirement of 25% matching monies up front, either cash or in-kind donations. But if you consider 25 to 40 grants out of $100 million, we're talking about big chunks of money. 25% of that is still a big chunk of money. So we looked at it, and then the final deal breaker for us was we said it really was designed to be one school. So we've got 18 school districts, over 50 school buildings. How do we say we're going after it for one school? So and
not have the villagers come after you with waving torches and pitchforks. Exactly.
So we regrettably and reluctantly backed away from that. And I gave the example when we were together in October of the Community Schools Grant, a laudable, honorable program that was, I think, really by all accounts designed more for urban centers and needed there. Not that it couldn't have benefited our kids if we could have found a way to pull it together, but it just wasn't something that we could envision being successful with, either in the application or the implementation when all was said and done. So those are our big criteria, the sustainability, do we need this, likelihood of success, do we have staff and the time to get the job done, does it lend itself to a cooperative application? Individual districts sometimes will go after something individually and will help them, but it may not be something that multiple schools can come together and have a viable collaborative effort on. And then sometimes there's the reading between the lines piece. Like I said, on that community schools grant, an example of that would be when I saw it in sort of in, I don't want to say the fine print, but you had to really read down a ways to see there were certain phrases that indicated large chunks of that money were earmarked for New York City. And I'm not saying that to be critical, they need it. But when you see a grant that you can see money is being very specifically earmarked and there are certain limitations and certain requirements, you have to read carefully between the lines and say, okay, this one may not be for us. Let's use our scarce resources of time and energy to go after the ones that we think we can get. And I think we've been pretty successful at that.
Yeah, you know, sometimes you get money that you haven't necessarily applied for. I think just a few months ago, wasn't Bill Owens had a pot of money for that the schools did, and it was for the college prep type courses.
Yes.
You hadn't actually applied for that. That just was a federal grant that you got, right? So that's kind of once in a while it's nice to get those bonuses, isn't it? That you don't have to go to a lot of work to apply for.
It is kind of nice, and we'll occasionally see that with our representatives in the Assembly and the Senate as well. They'll come home with some bullet aid that'll help us out, and sometimes that's kind of an added bonus.
Yeah. Steve, a lot of people know that our schools are underfunded, and it's very unfair. Basically, your education can be based on your zip code, as Donna has mentioned so many times. Do you see grants being the way of the future, or do you think equitable funding for schools is anywhere near the horizon?
Well, yeah, and that's the $64,000 question.
It's probably more like a $65 million question.
Exactly. I'm going to answer that in two ways.
Okay.
What do I wish and what do I think will likely happen? I wish we had equitable funding. I mean, there's about $58 billion spent each year here in New York State on public education. I'm not going to suggest we ought to spend more. That should be plenty. We're not distributing it equitably, and we're not spending it always in the most effective fashion. So if we were distributing it in a way that was more equitable and consistently spending it well, I think we'd be fine. So my dream would be a system like, well, we recently did a trip. My boss, Tom Burns, put together a team of folks from BOCES and from regional schools. We went up to the Ottawa-Carleton School District, which covers the city of Ottawa and surrounding areas. 75,000 students, 150 school buildings, one big school district. We studied all kinds of neat things there and learned a lot. They're coming down in a few weeks to spend some time in our schools to learn some things that we're doing, they believe, better than they are. And so there's plenty to learn both ways. But one thing that I saw that they do better than us is in the province of Ontario, they equitably fund their schools by distributing it equally, and it's not based upon the property tax of the locality. So your zip code does not determine the quality of your education. Do I believe there's ever going to be a time in the foreseeable future when we're there in New York? I would be foolhardy to say that I thought politically we were going to go there. But God, wouldn't it be nice if we were at a point where every school was getting, regardless of how wealthy the people living there was enough money to fund, fully fund the educational system.
Exactly.
And that's really going to take a reorganization of the way we deliver services, isn't it?
I think so.
You're not going to get that when we still have over 700 little school districts or even a few big school districts. We've got to look at that very differently, I think.
Very much so, and it's hard. It's a hard thing to do, to make that radical a change in something that people really consider so central to their community identities. It's really a challenge, but there's no question we need to cooperate and collaborate as much as we can between our districts to try and make the most of what we've got.
And that,
Exactly.
we are very fortunate in this BOCES area to have that kind of cooperation and that kind of collaboration going on every day. Steve, thank you very much for coming in. It's been a real pleasure to hear some good news about education for a change.
Right.
When during budget season, it always seems to be a lot of negative news, but this is a good news story, and we appreciate you coming in to do it. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
It's been a pleasure.
Our pleasure.
Hello again.